Hello and welcome, this is Oleksiy Melnyk and you're watching Head to Head with uatv. It has now been 4 years since eastern Ukraine erupted into war. Berlin is pushing for an armed UN peacekeeping mission to enforce a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine, and France has traditionally controlled the post of UN peacekeeping head. Both of these countries participate in Normandy format, negotiating with the Russian occupiers about restoring peace and territorial integrity of Ukraine. So what can be expected this year, and what to put more faith in, the Blue Helmets or a U.S. decision to supply Kyiv with lethal weapons? To answer these questions, we are joined in the studio by Oleksiy Melnyk, co-director of Foreign Policy and International Security Programs at the Razumkov Center. Hello, and thank you for being with us today.
Hello, Liz. Thank you for inviting.
Mr. Melnyk, so what is the current situation in the conflict zone?
Well, if you're talking about current situation, I mean, during today, that it seems like there is real ceasefire. But if you take a longer period, let's say the last year, I wouldn't call it a frozen conflict. I wouldn't call it a real ceasefire. So it's still quite a violent situation. There is still a potential for escalation at any time.
Well, for sure, we see that Minsk agreements are not being implemented at all by the separatist side. You mean that now the ceasefire is happening? Do you think that this is going to be the tendency for the upcoming year?
Talking about first about the Minsk agreement, I'd like to remind you that the Minsk agreement has expired back in 2016. And this is just one of the nuances about the Minsk agreement. Secondly, you said that the other side does not fulfill its commitments. But I would also say that the Ukrainian side is also reluctant to fulfill all its commitments, especially in the part of the political commitments.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that according to the Minsk agreement, the Ukrainian government, to the moment, had to adopt law on legislation, on special status, and amendments to the constitution, which was not being done. But I think it's a good thing, rather than, we have to blame Ukraine for not doing this. And about the ceasefire, I would also like to remind that this is already the 17th 1.7 ceasefire declared from the beginning of the conflict. And I don't think that there would be different, this ceasefire, so-called New Year ceasefire, will be different from the previous ones.
Well, the thing is that it was reported that Russian militants are provoking Ukrainian soldiers for the conflict escalation. So then they can accuse the Ukrainian soldiers and the situation worsening. And after so many violations from the side of the separatists, why would this matter? Why would this behavior to provoke somebody matter?
Oleksiy, I would fully agree with you that, and I do believe that most of the provocations being done by the separatists or so-called pro-Russian rebels, whatever, terrorists, but also what I think is missing there is a true and objective, unbiased information, which was supposed to come from the OSCE SMM monitoring mission. Because if you read the other side, their websites or Russian websites, they always accuse Ukrainian side of being provocative.
Of course.
And that's what I would expect from the international observer, the SMM mission, to give a precise and honest report which side is to be blamed. Because usually what is written in their reports, both sides, and you have actually no idea which side started first and which side was just forced to respond.
Mm-hmm. So then just the Ukrainian ATO headquarters rely also on this information.
On which information?
On the information of these international institutions.
I wouldn't say that we rely, or Ukrainian side relies on the information provided by SMM, but every side, trying to show that the other side are the bad guys. Mm-hmm. And my point is that what I expect and what I would like to see from the SMM reports, more clarity, Because every time we come to negotiations, either in Minsk or in Normandy format elsewhere, that every time we hear these both sides. And I think it just does not contribute to any perspective of the first conflict resolution, and then to the whole issue of what the proper place has to be devoted to Ukraine and to Russia.
Mm-hmm. Well, the war situation was just discussed by the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sigmar Gabriel, and Ukrainian counterpart, Pavlo Klimkin. Do you have maybe some results of their talks?
Well, I followed the news in the media today, and of course there have been a number of statements made, but I would probably not be able to mention any results so far of the negotiations. Having said that, I would also like to emphasize that there have been some changes in German rhetorics. First, about the peacekeeping operations, perspective of peacekeeping operation, which seems to me that now they are more on the Ukrainian side, which, I mean, our proposal was to, if the peacekeeping operation is to take place, then it should be a full-fledged peacekeeping operation, not just to guard the SMM observers. And the second statement made by the German foreign minister, which I personally don't like, is his assessment about the Americans' decision to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine.
So, but speaking about the UN peacekeeping mission, do you believe that UN peacekeeping mission is going to happen this year in Donbas?
I think, or I'm afraid, it doesn't matter whether I believe or I don't believe.
Well,
but my...
We can never be sure, but still we invited you to give your opinion.
Yeah, but my personal assessments, based on both theoretical knowledge and practical experience, because I used to take part in one of the peacekeeping operations back in mid-90s, that the probability of first deployment of the UN troops during the year 2018 is rather low. But even more important, that in case if such a decision made and the proper mandate is provided for the peacekeeping operations, and even if we or the UN is able to provide such a number of troops, the perspectives of this particular mission in Donbas to be successful are rather gloomy.
Well, what can we do about it? How can we change the situation then?
What can we do? You mean as the Ukrainian
perspective
side?
doesn't seem so negative.
I think first of all we have to be realistic. We don't have to be naive, because again, even if we have this peacekeeping mission in Donbas, even if it is successful, the peacekeeping mission is just one of the stages of the conflict resolution. Peacekeepers will not solve all the problems that were before the conflict and were created by the ongoing conflict. So I think that Ukrainian side has, Ukrainian government has to do everything possible to make this mission happen, no matter whether we believe it or not. And second, have to develop a strategy, finally, and make it public, what we are going to do to reintegrate these regions into Ukraine, what we are going to do after these regions are reintegrated, or, I mean, the government control established over this region, and then the job will not be done. This is not the victory, this is not the end of story. Peacekeepers will not solve all our problems, and I think this is the main issue that the Ukrainian government first have to understand, and second, to do something.
Well, what could Ukraine do also in terms of Normandy format to restore the peace?
Normandy format actually delivered the already mentioned Minsk Agreement, or the number of Minsk, not agreements, it was kind of set of accords, so this is not a real international document. And Normandy format helped a lot to not to stop violence in Donbas, but to limit it to some extent. But I'm afraid the Normandy format is not the proper one to resolve the current conflict. Because what we saw during last few months when Ambassador Kurt Walker actually appeared on the stage, that Russians actually do not see Germany or France as the equal partners. And unfortunately, we also have to say that probably Germany and France, I mean, no matter how thankful we are for their support, they are not probably having this also kind of strategy, of the proper strategy of the conflict resolution. They put too much attention to the negotiations and peaceful instruments, which do not work, unfortunately, with Russia.
But whom does Kremlin see as the negotiator in this case? The United States?
Definitely, they see the United States. They put a lot of hope for President Trump elected, but then, soon after they learned that the kind of trade-off they wanted to offer a big deal to Trump actually didn't work. But still, they probably see only the United States of America as an equal partner. And unfortunately, after a number of meetings between Kurt Walker and his Russian counterpart, Surkov, they came out of the room with no results so far.
Mm-hmm. But could you explain our audience why would Russia want to see the counterpart in the negotiations, Donald Trump? What is the interest and what is the influence?
What is the interest? I don't watch Russian TV, but I read some Russian experts' assessments about what is going on Russian media. And one of the key messages that Russian media sends to the public, and which is actually accepted by the public, this is not actually the war between Russia and Ukraine. This is war between Russia and the United States.
So they want to continue the Cold War?
Yeah, so that's kind of, they want to show, because for Russia, Russia with the current feeling of being, again, great power, world power, that's probably not proper enemy for them, Ukraine. And that's why if Ukraine is not a proper enemy, that Ukraine is not a proper side to negotiate, or as we already mentioned, France or Germany, they don't fight with France and Germany, they fight with the United States, and they want to negotiate. So Yalta 2 is something that Putin is aiming for.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so far Russia seems like already started the information campaign, spreading rumors that the United States would join the Normandy format, but Kurt Walker says that this is complete nonsense, basically. So if Kurt Walker denies this, what would you forecast? What could be the next step of Moscow to stand for this?
Any Russian initiatives should be considered very carefully. If Russia or the Kremlin propose the United States to join Normandy format, I'm absolutely sure the main incentive for Russia or the rationale behind such a proposal is not to make a step forward toward the conflict resolution. Russian proposals on a peacekeeping mission is not to solve the conflict. And I can, go on and on with Russian proposals and why we should be very careful with their proposals. But coming back to the beginning of your question, I think the only aim that Russia is going to achieve by inviting the United States to the Normandy format is to use this already, let's say, not a conflict, but some different opinions different approaches between the United States and Germany. So by dividing the partners, Ukrainian partners, Russia is aiming to achieve its own goal. not to solve the conflict, be sure.
Thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
That was Oleksiy Melnyk, co-director of Foreign Policy and International Security Programs at the Razumkov Center. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I am Oleksiy Melnyk. Goodbye.